My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. When I grew up in the late 60s and early 70s, those of us who envisioned a different path, including world peace, environmental conservation, equality, and brotherly love, were labeled radicals. Several months ago, in the midst of the pandemic, I advocated that it was time for radical action. These actions included radical kindness, radical generosity of means and of spirit, radical service to others, radical compassion, and radical love. I think I left one item off of that list, radical happiness. Is it true that most of those that perform the acts I alluded to are generally happy in the doing and giving? But with all of the negative news, the fear that it generates, and the amplification of this through social media, can we be truly happy? Is happiness an option? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Dr. Lynda Ulrich, says that happiness is an option and that we can be thriving instead of surviving in the era of the Internet. Dr. Lynda Ulrich has been a business leader, global traveler, artist, and innovator her whole life. From her earliest experiences, she learned to seek goodness around her, demand it when it was lacking, and never take a day for granted. She and her childhood sweetheart and eventual husband and business partner, Dr. Chuck Verderber, turned their wonder at the world and comfort with risk into a lifetime of making counterintuitive choices that brought them challenges, lessons, and countless blessings. Together, they've built a unique dental practice in northern Vermont with a focus on keeping the humanity in healthcare. That foundation, with further inspiration, led her to create a place on the Internet with no politics or ads and where visitors may feel confident about the future. The website is everwideningcircles.com, and she joins me this week to discuss her new book, Happiness is an Option, Thriving Instead of Surviving in the Era of the Internet. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited Dr. Lynda Ulrich. Hello, Lynda. How are you?
Hello, Victor. I'm absolutely delighted to chat with you today.
And it's so wonderful to have you on and share your story. So let's get started with that. Your happy story, your path with Dr. Chuck, and how you established your life and your practice together.
Well, my husband and I grew up in a really small farming town in central Illinois, where corn and soybeans stretches out in flat expanses every direction to the horizon. And he was a town kid, and I was a country kid, and we discovered each other in our freshman year of high school. And it couldn't be described in any other way than kismet. And we came from really different backgrounds, but we both grew up in households where kindness was the value of the day. And that kind of good-natured awareness of others and things was something that brought us through, now 40 years.
And then how did you establish your practice together?
So my dad was the last of the Mohicans, one of those doctors that delivered your baby, took out your tonsils, and you had his home phone number. He would meet you in the emergency room and sew your kid up after a motorcycle accident. He was the ultimate humanitarian, and we never saw him. He was giving so much to others. And of course, that was the ethos of both of our households, is service to others. So we loved that. But for us, especially discovering each other so early in life and coming both of us from big loving families, we wanted a real family life. And the neighbor was a dentist. And so while my dad never got to do any of the normal things that dads do, Dr. Doolin drove in the driveway every night at 6 o'clock. And while he did spend his working hours helping others, we thought that lifestyle looked pretty interesting. And we were both artists and scientists. And so that's the direction we went.
You mentioned that both of your households had a foundation of kindness and service. What was that predicated on?
In my own household, my parents both came from disastrous childhoods. My mom was orphaned by the time she was 10, and she crossed the United States all alone to get to an aunt that was not aware that her parents had both died. And my dad had a tyrannical father that drove him out of his home when he was a youth. So my compass for goodness and what's possible comes from what the life that both of those two were able to cobble together and then expand. And my husband has a similar story. He has a sister with severe cerebral palsy and another one that spent a summer in a body cast, 7 kids. Dad was a hardworking guy and mom used limited resources to stretch the food budget. So in both of those stories, kindness, again, saves the day. And that's one of the things I talk a lot about now with Ever Widening Circles. Be kinder than you need to be, which we may get to later on.
Absolutely, radical kindness. What was your take on media and the internet in general before you received that letter from one of your young patients in 2014?
I really had a thought that just kept popping back up into my head. You know, I have a very relationship-oriented dental practice, so we dive in deep with people and celebrate what we can find going on in their lives and talk about the hard things. And I noticed over a period from about 2010 to 2013 that people had a growing sense of future fatalism. People that I'd known their whole lives as super chipper and upbeat were starting to have these downward spiral conversations about the hopelessness of the future. And every time I'd have one, I'd go away saying, oh, somebody has to do something about this. And then the day came when I had a calling. As you mentioned, I got an email from a young patient who I'd known since he was a toddler one day, and he was in a bad way. He had volunteered for the Army and was in a foxhole in some bleak place in the world. And when he was needing some thoughts about possibility, he thought to write me. And I think that's because I had always, on his visits, turned him on to all kinds of wonder that's in the world that he would have never known about. And so that was it. That was the day I said, oh, this is terrible. Somebody's got to do something about it, and it's going to be me.
And in response to his sharing, you began a search. What were you looking for, and what did you find?
Well, in my relationships, I really try and stick to the things that we all have in common. So I had to be sure that if I could find someplace on the internet that was uplifting and future focused, that it was a place that wouldn't offend people's culture, generation, or politics. So that's the search I went on. What I did for Cameron was things had gotten so bad from the day-to-day conversations being so troubling with patients from time to time. I had created a list of my favorite TED Talks. 20 of the best that would lead people into a rabbit warren of wonder. And that's what I actually did that day for Cameron because I had little else to offer him. But I did go on an enormous search of the internet. I probably spent about 3 weeks. And every time I thought I found a possible winner, a link that I could give people like Cameron, I would look closer and see that they had a political or a commercial agenda that I just couldn't, I would have no way of knowing whether it would resonate with this person, so it might not be helpful at all. And after about 3 weeks, one day I just snapped and said, okay, let's go. I found a local kid that was really, really savvy on the internet, and we built the first website.
And that became the foundation for Ever Widening Circles. Tell us about that.
Well, I was very fortunate. My husband and I, by the time we were seniors in high school, Chuck was one of the top 20 All-American basketball players in the country. And that launched us into the wider world because he was captain at Kentucky for 2 years when Kentucky was arguably the premier basketball program in the world. Well, that led us to travel through Asia. It led him to a contract in Spain. We became Irish citizens. We lived in Italy after we graduated dental school and practiced dentistry there. So we were able to have this really expansive view of the world. And that didn't square with what I was seeing on the news or on the internet at all. My thesis for Ever Widening Circles became, it is still an amazing world. Because I realized that ordinary people may never see the level of generosity, ingenuity, and kindness that my kids saw in our travels. And that was such a shame. So that's what I was dedicated to bringing people.
You know, we had talked a little bit before the show about an episode on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. And it was made by people who were in that founding era of the digital conversion, the digital revolution, and that they had the best of intentions, but those intentions went astray. Why do you think they went astray?
The first of all, I need to say that one of the things that I'm pointing people to in almost every interview I do these days is that documentary. It's called The Social Dilemma, and it is the knowledge base we all need to make the next leap. I always like to say that you've got to have 3 stars aligned before you can make a really big social change. You have to have the motivation throughout society. Certainly we've got that. Most of us know we've got to rein in the chaos and division in our lives. And then you have to have the knowledge, and this documentary is the key to that. And then then we need a plan, which is turned out to be what my book is. But the social dilemma is key to this knowledge base because you know what? It is people who invented the like button on Facebook or the infinite scroll on our phones or the algorithm that feeds us the next YouTube channel. And they're not doing that work anymore. These are people who invented these things with hopes and dreams of connecting us all. And they are really, really authentic, ordinary people in this documentary. And so they assure us that the intentions were good, but things quickly went wrong. And now we are all living with an attention economy that simply is vying for every molecule of our attention. So that's what I really like about the documentary. It's very clear to see these folks had good intentions when this all started, but then things went really, really wrong.
It's the story of humanity from the time fire was discovered. Fire can provide heat, it can provide cooking, it can provide all kinds of wonderful things. It can also be used as a weapon. So it really depends on, it's not the technology, it's the use of the technology.
Yeah. It's a great documentary for that reason, is that you can feel the common humanity in these folks. And that's what makes it, there's not a shred of politics in it. That's what makes it so empowering, actually, is because we see other human beings telling us like it is. And I think we need that more than ever, with compassion. You can tell every one of these people has tremendous compassion for the state of the world right now.
And that brings us to Ever Widening Circles. What are some of the categories that are featured on Ever Widening Circles?
Well, Victor, that was one of the things I really struck out to do differently than what I found on the web in that original 3-week intense search. What I found was that we were all so delighted that this thing called the internet was in our lives that we had found ourselves rapidly isolating in our silos. You know, if there was a certain music genre that you loved, you might just be absolutely reveling in finding all kinds of people who loved what you love, or if you love gardening or auto mechanics or whatever it might be. And I had this real sense, even back in 2013-14, that may be our undoing. That if we lost touch with what connects us all, we may not be able to get back to it easily. So I created all kinds of categories on Ever Widening Circles. And that's actually the way the internet works. That's been quite a problem with becoming known, because, you know, since we're not just doing children's stories, or we're not just doing science, or we're not just doing arts, the internet doesn't work to keep high level, expansive, diverse content at the top. So you can find, if you love science, great. Here's what I always tell people, Victor. If you like science, if you like art, if you like humanities, if you like TED Talks, go in, dive into any of the categories across the top of our website, but then hit the Surprise Me button. Because often enough, the Surprise Me button will give you just the kind of insight that you need to make the next leap in your life.
It's intuitive.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I looked at some of the stories shared on Ever Widening Circles, and they are not only inspiring, but also a source of great hope. Please share one or two of those stories with us.
Well, the first one I really love to share gives us a real window into why we need positive media right now. I hope that one day all the media that's available to us is balanced. But for right now, of course, we all know that the overwhelming trend in media is to ratchet up the fear and drama, or it may not be the intent, but what is happening is it's ratcheting up the fear and drama. So to get a balanced worldview, I think we have to search for goodness and progress on the internet. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that later, that why the internet's not going to bring it to us. So our notions about sharing the insights and innovation that no one else is celebrating, the best kind of example I could give you is this story. So there's a man named Topher White who has figured out how to save the remaining rainforests using old cell phones, like we all have in a junk drawer. So Topher was he was on vacation. He's an engineer on vacation in Borneo, I believe it was, and he was in an orangutan sanctuary in a piece of protected forest. And while he was there, looking at the orangutans, all of a sudden the staff started running into the woods in one direction, and he followed. And that somebody had heard the faint sound of a chainsaw. And again, this was a protected piece of forest. It was very precious. So they discovered a logging crew cutting down an enormous tree. And Topher had followed, and it really left him grounded in the fact that the reason why a lot of illegal logging goes on is because the rainforest is so full of sound. Marvelous sounds of every animal and insect we could ever imagine. And so he had this notion that if you took old cell phones and tuned them to only listen for the frequency of a chainsaw, and then you put them in the canopy of the forest, they could, the minute a chainsaw was started, it could send a signal to local wardens to rush in and stop the illegal logging. Now, the reason why this is important is for all kinds of reasons that I've later learned. But, 23% of the greenhouse gases come from deforestation every year.
Absolutely.
And so we got to get on this. And Topher has this amazing idea. And he could literally remove 23% of the greenhouse gases that we're all struggling so much to eliminate, if only we knew about him. This is the problem with our current system of attention on the internet, is that we will never know about the Topher Whites of the world and the Rainforest Connection. If you want to look up a project that's enlightening, look up the Rainforest Connection. And I'll give you one more twist about this project. This is the way innovation goes. And we could talk for hours about all these projects that we celebrate. He got connected with the Cornell's Department of Ornithology, the bird department, and they figured out that long before the chainsaws start, the sound of the birds changes. So now they set these cell phones up to detect the sound of the bird song changes. And of course, local authorities can rush in and stop the logging before a chainsaw ever touches a tree trunk. I want to point out two things about that story that have always been an aha moment for me. So I'm not sure, most people have forgotten because we've had so many disasters since, but in the fall of 2019, you literally could not turn on the TV without seeing images of the rainforest burning in Brazil. Some people may remember that chapter, but as I say, it was a lot of disasters ago. But, that kind of news story over and over and over can be so crushing. And what happens to me, because I know so much about insight and innovation, is that I can hold that crushing feeling in one hand and hope in the other. Because knowing about projects like Topher's or a few others I might tell you about helps you hold hope and discouraging things in both hands, and you can move forward. There's a famous data scientist named Hans Rosling who used to say, it's possible for things to be really, really bad and still getting better.
Absolutely. My guest is Dr. Lynda Ulrich. She's the author of Happiness is an Option, Thriving Instead of Surviving in the Era of the Internet. Lynda, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your website and all this wonderful work.
The book is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's you can find it at my public speaking website at dr-lynda.com. That's dr-lynda.com. And everything points back to the website. The website at everwideningscircles.com is a place to navigate a brighter future. What you're going to feel when you come away from Ever Widening Circles every day is less fear, more joy, and unlimited potential, because you're going to see it there. You're going to see 1,000 people living it that we're just not hearing nearly enough about. And I'd like to add one other thing. You know, we have a gorgeous app that we developed during the pandemic, and I want folks to think about that app. We're charging $1 a month for this thing so we can pay for it, but mostly so that people all around the world, no matter their life circumstances, can afford it. And I want people to think of this app as a vote, because I'm going to get into in a few minutes how we can send signals, send a message to content creators that we will support positive content. And that app's the quickest way to do it. Our goal is to get 1 million people to download the Ever Widening Circles app in the coming year. And that will send a powerful signal to anybody that's creating news and content for the internet that we're all ready for a new era.
And they can get that at their app store on any phone.
Yeah. Ever Widening Circles app. Yeah.
Wonderful. We'll be back with more of Lynda after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly spread of germs. Armed with only soap and water and hands, your superhero can protect you, your family, and everyone out there in America land. Amazing! Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living. A chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me, and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
So I'm a cat. And I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Dr. Lynda Ulrich. She's the author of Happiness is an Option, Thriving Instead of Surviving in the Era of the Internet. Lynda, in the last segment, you were talking about some wonderful stories on ever-widening circles. There's another one you'd like to share with us.
Yes, I always love to tell people about the outsiders, the innovator outsiders. I think they may be some of the most important folks in our future to bring us to new places when we're trying to solve really intractable problems. So there's a project called the Akashinga Project, Akashinga Initiative in Africa, that is the most extraordinary example of how outsiders can bring new ways of thinking to really tough problems. So Damien Mander is an amazing thought leader who was, during the Iraq War, a part of the Australian Armed Forces in Iraq. And after that conflict died down, he went on vacation in Africa and was kind of wondering what his purpose in the world would be. He was a sniper, an expert in paramilitary tactics. And one thing led to another on a trip to Africa, and he realized that what we are fighting when it comes to trying to protect endangered species is a war. He had a particular incident on this trip that changed his life, and he realized that the tactics we were using to try and save endangered species and protect them needed to have a complete overhaul and a rethink. And when he put his mind to it, he figured out that the thing ratcheting up the problems in the endangered species protection world was that often organized crime was involved, which I had really never thought about. So he applied these paramilitary tactics to teaching game wardens how to fight like that. And they made some success in Mozambique, but they realized that they were just ratcheting up the war itself. And then one thing led to another, and he decided to train single mothers to be game wardens in Africa. And everything flipped. He found that single mothers had this kind of indomitable spirit that made them last through this rigorous training 1,000% better than their male counterparts for some reasons that we could go into another time. And then the very beauty of this notion of people that are part of the community and are connected in neat ways really is what makes this project rise to the top. Is that these single mothers, 80% of their wages go back to serving their communities. They're raising children who are super connected to protecting the environment around their communities. They are looked up to, so it's a really well-respected job. So there's a constant supply of game wardens. And most importantly, they know how to de-escalate. Of course, a lot of women in the world in tough circumstances can't afford to escalate. And so they have ways of protecting wildlife and their families and the communities in ways that are just peace building. So look up Damien Mander if you want to see a powerful TED Talk. Damien Mander is his name. There's a 2013 TED Talk that is just the picture of a compelling argument for good change.
Wonderful. What inspired your book, Happiness is an Option?
Well, I'll tell you, before the COVID pandemic, I was writing a book called The Conspiracy of Goodness. And along the way, I have talked to thought leaders all over the world with regularity. And I was speaking to one in the early part of April during the pandemic. And he said something like, Dr. Lynda, you've been telling us about goodness and progress for years. Don't you have something to say about this mess? And I said, well, actually, I do. So I put the Conspiracy of Goodness book on the shelf, and I wrote a book in about 42 days that can be a little how-to manual for us now as we want to get out of this mess, this grip that the negative dialogue about our times has on us. And so that's what it became. It became a story about those first few months of the pandemic, how we were all changing and our priorities were rearranging a bit. And then in the book, I teach people 4 simple shifts that they can use to change what they see on the screens in their life and, realize a future full of potential.
With all of the negative news that COVID-19 and the ensuing issues generated, what did you see as positive, life-affirming, and heartwarming?
So, of course, I seek signs of goodness and progress. So that's one of the very first things I teach people. And what I saw in those first few weeks and months was people recognizing what we all have in common. You'd be in the post office with your mask on, and you could exchange knowing glances with strangers. If you did turn on the news, there was an awful lot of gratitude flowing out of those commentators for quite some time, thanking the first responders. I noticed people doing quiet little things, which is something I love to talk about in the Conspiracy of Goodness. Quiet things for their neighbors and for strangers.
I remember when this first started, before the masks were required and everything else was going on, there was panic shopping in the local supermarkets in my area here in New York. And I went shopping one day and got online, and there was probably 40 people online waiting for cashiers. And this woman came out of an aisle, elderly woman, I was going to say probably close to 80, maybe early 80s. And she looked at this line and tears came into her eyes. And I said, I have to do something about this. And there was a lot of people behind me, and letting her into line in front of me would just have probably caused a riot, unfortunately, in the environment and the energy that was taking place that day. And I turned around and I said to the group behind me, I'm letting this woman in my place. I'm going to the back of the line. I invited her to take my place. And people were staring at me, some with smiles, some with shock. And this woman started crying and said, thank you so much. And doing simple things like that made so much of a difference.
It did. And if you had a little bit of a mindset about looking for those things, I really did see it happening all around me. And people, my patients were anxious to tell me those stories in their lives too.
You know, it's funny. When I grew up in an environment in the 50s and 60s where I was taught, please and thank you. If someone is coming behind you in a doorway, leaving a building or something, or entering a building, you hold the door open and let them go first. Simple courtesies, common courtesies that seem to have diminished, unfortunately, in the last 25 or 30 years. And I think people are starting to do those things again now.
Yeah, I think it's a matter, you hear this expression all the time, so maybe it's pretty cliche, but I think it's important, this I see you expression.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure I understood I'm not sure I understood that expression quite like I do now. After the pandemic, we all saw each other differently. We saw each other, we were able to live with each other's imperfections and the imperfections around us. Not all of us, for surely not all of us, but lots of us. We saw others. It's that knowing glance thing. It's a kind smile. It's no, you go before me. I think there was a lot of beauty happening in those first 3, 4, 5 weeks that we can hang on to. And at least even as times seem to get harder, we can remember those things now. It's not just, our grandparents telling us how it used to be. Yeah. Now we know how it was.
And you refer to this as the new wave. You called it the conspiracy of goodness. What is it, and how may we become co-conspirators?
Okay. So, we know this word conspiracy is just a lightning bolt in our society right now. And I'm just one of those people, Victor. I go towards things. Conflict to me is just part of creating something new. Creative tension. There's no two words in my book that were ever better suited from each other, because that's where everything new comes from, is if we go towards creative tension. So I really feel like when I stumbled upon this concept of the conspiracy of goodness, there was that pull and push, right? Well, how I landed on that phrase is I was speaking to a thought leader, Brian Krifcher of the Stanford Peace Project, and I was telling him about what I'd been doing at Ever Widening Circles for about 5 years, and he said, oh my gosh, Lynda, that's just like the story of the conspiracy of goodness. You know that story, don't you? And I did not. So I dove in, and of course, he told me the story that his dad used to tell, but if I was going to repeat this thing, I wanted to find the absolute origin of those 3 words. And I found it in the writing, 1986 writing from a Rabbi Harold Schulweis. So here's the story he used to tell. He said, during World War II, there was a little village of Le Chambon, France, that managed to hide 3,500 Jews from the Nazi concentration camps. And of course, that was at great risk to their own lives. And yet, they kept 3,000 people alive. Most of them turned out to be orphans for many, many years. So Rabbi Schulweis was giving a talk that he called The Conspiracy of Evil in Europe in 1980s. And he tells the story of an older man standing up from the back of the room and saying that he had hidden a family of Jews in his home. And the old man asked, "Do you think I could have hidden an entire family without the active cooperation of the milkman, the mailman, and the neighbors?" No, for every one person saved, there were 7 rescuers. It was a conspiracy of goodness.
That is so beautiful. How can we become co-conspirators?
Okay, so here's the number one thing I like to talk to people about, is that with this world and this media so full of problems, it's easy to shut down. It's logical to say, this is all too big for me. And we can either, tune it all out, or we can just get so apathetic we just pedal along in our own lives. But that story tells us we have another option. Like, you and I, Victor, do not have to go personally save the rainforests. But we can be the milkman, the mailman, and the neighbors for Topher White, for his project. We can do little things, a donation, send him our phone, share his stuff on social media with regularity. We can be the milkman, the mailman, and the neighbors in these times. Even if we don't feel like we're up to saving the rainforest, we can do so much.
And it's just a question of the extension of this radical kindness, this energy of understanding that we're all in this together and what part we can play to make it easier for others and better for others.
Absolutely. That's it. It's what we decide to give our attention to.
It's so simple, as everything in life is when we look at it with honesty and with an open heart. It really is so simple. And it goes back to the foundation. I've touched upon this with other shows before, that if you look at every major religion, every major faith in the world, the foundational message is the same. Love thy neighbor as thyself, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, isn't it?
All the same. We are so much the same. I always like to say, is it a coincidence that the word compass and the word compassion have so much in common? I don't think it is. I think there is a common compass in all of us for goodness and for this urge to be seen and the craving for connection with others. I think that we're going to come out of this pandemic with some gifts, and it may be that we appreciate a whole host of other things about each other than we cared about before.
By the way, we forgot to talk about in the last segment about ever-widening circles. That really is a family affair for you, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I have a great story about that. So I still had an 8th grader, a high schooler, and a freshman in college when I started Ever Widening Circles. So I was doing the businesswoman, health professional, mother thing at full gear, and took on this writing one article every single day to prove it's still an amazing world. And this daughter that I had graduated from Harvard about 3 years into my project, and she could have worked for anybody in the world because of her global background. We carry Irish passports, and I really thought when she graduated she would be off and running and I would never see her again. And she sat us down on the porch one day and she said, "Mom, I've looked at a lot of things I could do with the next 4, 5, 6 years, and I think your project has the most potential. And if you're willing to build a real website, let's go. Let's do it together." And so she and I have run Ever Widening Circles for now 4 years together. And she brings all the electricity and the hope and the sense of fearlessness that you would expect from a millennial.
Wonderful. And in our next segment, we're going to be talking about the 5 steps that you have to help readers find positivity, compassion, and kindness. My guest is Dr. Lynda Ulrich. Her book is called Happiness is an Option, Thriving Instead of Surviving in the Era of the Internet. We'll be back with more of Lynda after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
Hi, this is David Strickle. I'm excited to share my brand new show, The Stream of David Live, right here on OMTimes Radio. Each week I'll have exciting guests and I'll channel the eternal wisdom of the stream, a group of non-physical entities whose teachings have transformed lives all over the world. So join us for an uplifting hour each Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. That's The Stream of David Live right here on OMTimes Radio.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from New Thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Olivia from Washington. Laid off and trying to keep our little kids from realizing that Mommy and Daddy haven't eaten in a while.
Roger from California. I'm grateful we could afford our son's surgery. I'm nervous that now we can't really afford food.
Daniel from California. Choosing whether to pay the rent or pay to fix the car to get to work doesn't leave us with much at all. Now we can't even pay for meals.
Donna from Louisiana. The storm just hit, and we went from donating to the food bank to needing it.
Keisha from South Carolina. I've been skipping meals so my 2 kids can eat, but filling up on water doesn't really work.
Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
A social distancing tip.
Keeping your distance from others is important in slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are some fun things to do alone. Read a book, take a walk, unpack your suitcase from that trip you took last September, paint a self-portrait, catch up on a TV series, do a puzzle. Remember, we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Look out, world, we're getting strong. The future's here and we belong. She can STEM, she can do more. Like build a rocket and watch it soar. Or clean the oceans and make the world a better place. Oh, she can STEM, so can you. Find a cure, invent something new. There's no challenge in the world that she can't face. She can STEM.
Learn more at She Can STEM. A message brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Dr. Lynda Ulrich. She's the author of Happiness is an Option, Thriving Instead of Surviving in the Era of the Internet. Lynda, I understand that there's a Conspiracy of Goodness Summit coming up. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it's a wonderful counterintuitive move, of course, to hold a virtual conference in these times. But we kind of thought that we could be super useful and helpful. So on October 4th, 2020, it's a Sunday, we are hosting the Conspiracy of Goodness Summit, and we are bringing 8 speakers on that are thought leaders, global thought leaders, with connections to awe, wonder, and joy in remarkably diverse fields. These folks, for instance, we have Linda Principal Wayman, she's called. She is the woman who turned around the most dangerous high school in America. She is going to talk to us about wonder, which is something she thinks is really important that all children hang on to these days. We have Swikumar Rao, who's an amazing global speaker and thought leader in the world of wisdom. He studied all the world's religions and just picked out the wisdom part. And he shares that with people all over the world. We have James Nestor, who's a best-selling author, who right now is talking about the physiology of breath. Extraordinary information there. I could go on and on. We have some global travelers who are telling us about the most amazing philanthropists in the world doing critically important work in the most extraordinary circumstances and joyful through it all.
And how can our listeners find out about attending this?
So there is a website that you should check out called COG Summit. That stands for Conspiracy of Goodness. It's COG Summit, SUMMIT.com. And it's going to be a wonderful celebration of possibility. And we are going to teach people how to find less fear, more joy, and a brighter future.
That's so wonderful. You're going to be a big cog in that wheel, huh?
Well, you know what? All these folks are donating their time to this. It is really extraordinary, the passion that thought leaders in this world have for change.
Absolutely. Speaking of happiness is an option, in your book, you offer a 5-step plan to help readers find positivity, compassion, and kindness. Step 1 is finding the right ratio. What does that mean?
Okay. One thing that I love to tell audiences is that there was not some evil genius that got us into this mess with the internet. It's a simple story to follow. There were just, in 1993, there were only 130 websites. And by 2003, there were 40 million. And the originators of the internet were really interested in connecting us and getting information to us with ease. Those were their goals, good, valuable goals. But by 40 million websites, an organizing principle had to emerge from all that chaos, and it became attention. So things that were valuable or had merit or were good, that didn't matter. It was just what we would give our attention to. And that's how we got into the mess we're in now. Because quickly, like so often happens with humanity, a few people figured out that what we give our attention to is usually the scary things in this world. And they have used that neuroscience to construct algorithms and internet content and clickbait so that they can grip us quickly and keep us there. Absolutely. So that's the first thing to realize, that there's no evil geniuses at where we're at today. It was just how things evolved. And we are in the early stages of the internet. It's seriously like a child running with scissors. And the 4 shifts I teach people is how to stop running with it.
Step 2 is voting with your click. What happens when we click on something, and how may our informed clicking turn things around?
Okay, so if you really think about what I just told you, then we need to shift what we seek on the internet. Because if we have the notion that goodness is going to rise to the surface, we'll be sorely disappointed. So first, seek signs of goodness, because it's an attention economy and we're giving so much of attention to the scary things, we won't find it. But if you seek it, you will. The second thing is that your click is a vote. And what I tell people to do is to just pause. Pause before you connect with anything on the internet. Your click is a vote because someone is counting every click you make. And that sounds, again, like some scary thing, but it's really actually a great empowering piece of the puzzle here. Because if someone is counting every click we make, and they're making more content to fit what we're clicking on, then if we consciously pause and ignore more, which is the third step, we can ignore things right into obscurity. We can click on the things that are useful and helpful and measured, and we can ignore the things that are ratcheting up the division and the fear, and the internet would change seemingly overnight. It's an attention economy. That's just the way it works.
Which leads us to step number 3, adopting a positive worldview. Do we need rose-colored glasses, or is there a more affirmative way?
So I get the rose-colored glasses question all the time, of course, by hard-hitting journalists. And what I say is this. If you take 2 little very important primary duties that any human being might have, like running a business where other people depend on you for their livelihood and feeding their families, or raising a family, 2 things like that. No one would think it is rational to only know about the negative aspects of the world that related to those two important jobs. To be a good parent or a good business person, you have to have a balanced worldview. You have to know all about possibility and all about limitations. But if you just know one half or the other of the story, you're not going to be successful. And so that's the way I look at positive internet content or positive news or positive articles like that we do on Ever Widening Circles. It's just achieving a more balanced perspective about the world around you, and then you can navigate it with so much more clarity.
And you say we should ignore more. Do we need to find a cave or just change our habits?
No, it's just really a matter of shifting up from your amygdala. There's a part of your brain that's on 24/7 that responds to any sign of disorder or danger, any sign. And we literally cannot ignore our amygdala. And there's some real good reasons why it saves us. It saves us from putting our hand on a hot stove or, having a car accident. But what we need to do on the internet is shift up to the more critical thinking part of our brain. We can pause for just a millisecond, and instead of clicking on that blobfish or that scary headline or that mean posting on Facebook, we can pause and we can go, no, they're just trying to get me to click on that. In that pause is the power to change our futures.
It's like having a positive conversation with someone, and instead of reactively speaking, pausing, listening, considering, and then giving your response.
Yeah, the internet, as I mentioned, is such a new creation, really, in the scope of time. And it didn't come with a manual. So if you really think about it, we're due for a reimagining of the internet. And because it never came with a manual, we sort of stumbled into how we use it with this autopilot part of our brain. Mm-hmm. And I think we can rein this in. I think once people understand the secrets of the internet and how content creators, not all by any means, but many content creators are using that neuroscience I explained against us. And that's why it's so important to see the documentary, The Social Dilemma, because they explain exactly that. Once we know that, knowledge is power. We can do the three things. We can use our motivation, use the knowledge, make a leap.
Your fourth step is the conspiracy of goodness, which we already discussed. Your fifth step is called the gratitude economy. How may consumers and businesses use social currency to turn things around?
Well, I think a lot of us are already doing that. For the book, I did a little research, and I found that there was a really nice study done where they found that 62% of us are spending our money using our values first. So we're choosing to interact with companies that are in some way we see as making the world a better place. So 62%, that's huge, and it actually is up in 1 year by 13%. So you know how hard it is to move the needle on consumer habits. For gosh sakes, 13% in 1 year. This is a powerful, powerful wonder that's going on in the commercial world. So what I'm talking about is not just related to our neuroscience or our own personal habits, but we can inspire businesses and institutions, organizations to be a part of this conspiracy of goodness by selecting to do business with the ones that are making the world a better place.
Absolutely.
And so there's this whole economy growing up around what's called mission-driven for profits. And that is like Warby Parker glasses or Bombas socks or Tom's shoes. These are organizations that are still putting bread on the table. They're making money. They're for profits, but they started with a mission to make the world a better place.
For those not familiar with Bombas, they're a sock manufacturer. They make beautiful socks, but for every pair they sell, they donate a pair to a homeless shelter, and they've donated millions and millions of pair since their inception, so it's really wonderful.
So we can look for those people in the wider world economy, and I'll tell you, Victor, they're all around us in our communities.
Absolutely.
I'm a really big proponent of our looking for, in our own communities, for people trying to start these kind of businesses and supporting the heck out of them.
And finally, how may we turn contempt into curiosity?
Okay, so this is one of the concepts that is precious to my heart. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning of this interview that Chuck and I come from a small farming town in Illinois, and literally you were unable to just walk around with a snarl of contempt on your face. You just couldn't do it back then. You would be considered a little off. So what you had to do was, when somebody didn't think like you did, First, you had to be graceful and polite. And then most of the time, you would have to get curious. That was like the polite way to talk to people who didn't think like you, was to ask questions. And most of the time, it would turn out to be the most delightful sort of series of aha moments if you just get curious about someone who doesn't think like you. I think that's where the sweet spot's going to be in the coming era, is that we're going to be forced to recognize that everybody has something to offer. Everybody's experiences are valuable. And if we get curious, instead of starting with contempt, we can find places to create unimaginable good.
Her book is called Happiness is an Option, Thriving Instead of Surviving in the Era of the Internet. Lynda Ulrich, please tell our listeners one more time where they can get your book and find out more about you and this amazing work. Okay,
the book, Happiness is an Option, is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the regular outlets. EverWideningCircles.com is the place to refresh your sense of wonder and possibility about the world. The best way you can help, people are constantly asking me how they can help. The best way you can help is to download the app and use it every day as an antidote to the daily news.
Lynda, thank you and your husband and your daughter and all of the people at Ever Widening Circles for bringing a lot of beauty and hope to this world. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome, Victor.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.